Hey everyone, before we get started, I just want to properly introduce all of the bodies on the show today. We have Dr. Tuulia Law joining me from York University in Toronto, and two of her colleagues from Work Safe Twerk Safe, Jennifer and Janice, which I don't think I properly addressed on the episode. I also want to give a quick update in regards to the legal case in GoFundMe that we refer to on the show, that they actually won their first case. Yay! So please listen to the full episode for all details and continue to fund their cause for additional legal expenses if interested. Enjoy! Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Strip by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. I am your host. My name is Steph Sia, aka Kimchi on the stage. I am a stripper, also a digital content creator, so I do have an OnlyFans. I am a former sugar baby and the host of your show. It's me every single Sunday. And every week I bring to you a different guest, and we're doing things a little bit differently this week. I am bringing on an esteemed guest. I'm very excited, also a little bit nervous, but I am bringing Dr. Tuulia Law onto the show today. She is a criminology professor at York University, which is based in Toronto, Canada. Her key focuses in her research is teaching the interplay of gender norms and governance of sexual conduct, and has done extensive research in sex work involving strip clubs and management in the Canadian context. Dr. Law, are you here?
Yeah, hello. I'm happy to be here.
I am very happy and really honored and just surprised that you accepted my invitation. So thank you very, very much. I do appreciate it a lot. Looking forward to getting to conversation today. But I guess if you didn't know, or maybe I did I think I did tell you in the email, but I am a former criminology graduate at SFU. Yeah, former crim graduate and also gender studies minor.
Okay.
Back in the day.
I also did gender studies.
I feel it helps, and there's just so many intersecting layers there. So I just didn't know what I was going to do with that. I thought I was going to go to law school, and then that didn't happen. And then I started my own business, and then somehow I ended up in sex work. And yeah, I mean, it's been a really, really interesting journey. But now one of my professors at SFU, I had reached out to originally. He then was unable to do the interview, so I reached out to one of the colleagues that he recommended, which was, I believe, one of your colleagues, Dr. Chris Bruckert.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, who has had nothing but great things to say about you. So I'm just glad we're able to connect. So thanks again. I am really just excited to get into it. But that was kind of what I briefly knew about you. But would you like to give yourself your own introduction in terms of defining who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. I guess these days, most of my time is spent being a professor, which online is a little bit more than before. Mm-hmm. Although it's kind of sad because I think students are getting a bit less than before, but this is the context we're in right now with the pandemic.
Right.
I guess the pandemic is shaping a lot of what I do right now. So, I mean, like it is with everyone. So one of the things that I'm doing is working with an organization that my co-founder will be coming on to join us in a bit today.
Yes.
Jennifer. So our organization is a by and for strippers organization that provides legal information. We have a website, we have events, and we're undertaking some interesting legal activism right now that we can talk about a little bit when she gets on. So I guess there's a lot of overlap between that stuff and the research that I do. I've done research about management in the sex industry with Dr. Chris Bruckert that was very informed by sex worker community groups. Right now it's grant application season in academia, so I'm I'm applying for a small institutional grant and a larger national grant to do some more stuff with Work Safe Twerk Safe to look at what people are doing in the context of COVID in the sex industry, right? Because certainly with strip clubs, and with any in-person sex work, it was a big change, quarantine, right? People had to move themselves online, which sounds like maybe that's what you did as well. Or maybe you were one of the lucky people to have that expertise beforehand. But it's a very different landscape. Pardon me?
Forever learning.
Yeah.
There's definitely new things that pop out just so frequently. So, but yeah, like it's been a struggle. I actually did a COVID mini-series earlier in the pandemic last year, which I thought maybe I was going to maybe stop the podcast because I was doing a lot of my interviews in person. And then the COVID mini-series kind of identified and looked at the current challenges that sex workers were going through, whether it was at the strip club, in-person doming sessions, escorting, and how people have had to pivot and kind of rethink their strategy and rejig their line of work.
Yeah, and it's different skills that people don't necessarily have. I can certainly understand that, in my job right now, like it's not, I'm glad that I had the practice of doing the Work Safe Twerk Safe website because, I've had to up my online learning platform game this year because you kind of have to try to seduce students into doing the work when it's not in person. So I've been hoping that helps, but it's been a learning curve. Even though I am able to keep my job and the institution is resourced enough to give us like training about that, it's still a lot of figuring it out.
It's a lot of figuring out for sure. And I feel, with sex workers that have had to move or have chosen to move their line of work online, it's a lot. It's a very different form of work. I would say it's even harder than the in-person work, but that's a whole nother topic.
It's a hassle.
Yeah, but I really wanted to get into your origins and your interest in terms of why sex work and the inspiration in terms of like what motivated you to study sex work and to go down the academia route.
Well, I guess in my 20s, I was living a different kind of life. I knew a lot of sex workers, and it just seemed like something that would be a good contribution to research that in an academic context. And also, it's a kind of research where you need to have personal contacts. Like I don't know how people do it without personal contacts because there's a lot of mistrust among sex workers that I think is very warranted because a lot of people are trying to save them.
Yes.
So, and I also got into it because I got in with my supervisor who was doing a lot of really exciting stuff. Chris Bruckert is a really great researcher in the sex work field of research, and so I was able to get in on a couple of projects with her, and that was really like a door open to I guess finding out that I really liked doing this, and it was a good environment for me. I'm a good self-motivator because it's very I guess it's similar to strip clubs in that way. It's you kind of just manage your time and decide whether or not you're working and when. And so it's similar in that way. So yeah, it's just something that I'm glad now I'm feeling like established. Suddenly I feel like I've been at York for a couple of years and now I'm doing this surprisingly important stuff.
Yes.
With admin related stuff. So it's a stressful time, but it's also exciting.
Very exciting. And it's such good work, and it's just work that we need to discuss and also just get out there in a more realistic and positive light. As you said, there are a lot of assumptions. As you said, the saving complex, and of course, like a lot of stereotypical notions that are put on sex workers. Like, where do you think that comes from? Like, other than that's how society has painted sex workers to be.
I mean, I don't think that we can underestimate the the hugeness of how that's how sex workers are painted to be, right? I think it has to do with gender norms. Like, it's really not what women are expected to do, right? I guess another area of research that I do is around how sexual assault and consent are being talked about on university campuses. And how they're engaging with that, and the similarities and differences between what's happening now versus what was happening in the 70s with second wave mainstream feminism.
Right.
And looking at that has told me a lot about why these kinds of stereotypes about sex workers are so persistent. And it's because I think even still, in spite of all this stuff that's changed around gender and sexuality, for example, in the last 30 years or so, or even less than that, maybe in the last 15 or 20 years, I think people being gender fluid, like, that wasn't a thing 15 years ago, really, that people knew about. But even in spite of all that, I think that the way women react to sexual assault is still telling, and just the discourse around that, it still suggests in some ways that rape is a fate worse than death. And to me, that says that, like, that means that women's sexual integrity is or sexual respectability is their most valuable possession. And that's why I think people are still uncomfortable about sex work, because it really rejects that and flies in the face of it. And even people who are young, even some of my students, they still, even if they're otherwise feminist, you can still see that it's hard for them to shed these assumptions and stereotypes about sex work. And so there's often a discomfort there, even amongst people who like to think of themselves as intersectional or progressive or
whatever. That happens a lot too. Even as you said, even self-proclaimed feminists will still reject sex workers. And it's still surprising to hear that, even to this day. Why do you think that is? Is that just because, again, of like how women's roles are painted or have been painted, or?
So I guess with regard to feminism, I think there's two ways that feminists are rejecting or failing to recognize sex workers these days. One is the kind of classic second wave feminist, prostitution and pornography are violence framing. And the other is, I would say, maybe like it's all well-intentioned, right? So a well-intentioned but misinformed and kind of underdeveloped understanding of colonialism and racialization, where, young feminists, I find sometimes are more likely to think that the sort of like high class escorts that they imagine to be like rich and white. Yes. And like I just think it's interesting that that's sort of I guess that's its own stereotype, although it's a good stereotype. In terms of it not being like pathetic, but that they have that image in their mind that they then contrast with, racialized and indigenous women struggling on the street and not having any agency at all, which indigenous and racialized sex workers and academics have done some really interesting and important work to deconstruct and reject that, right? It's not that black and white. It's not that much of a dichotomy.
Right.
Yeah, so it's interesting that when there's those gaps in knowledge, that even young feminists kind of fill it in with, I guess, with stuff that we wouldn't expect, right? Because it's still ultimately sort of squeamish, but now it's squeamishness informed by, I think a well-intentioned, but maybe overly reactive and underinformed critique of colonialism.
Right. Do you find that because again, as you said earlier, like stuff like gender and sex work, like that wasn't as liberal, I would say. I don't know if that's the right word, as it is now. And I find that the younger generations are just a lot more woke nowadays. Like, do you find that, and going back to what you said, but like not being as educated on it, but also being educated on it, but fueled by, I don't know, anger, I guess. I'm not, what am I trying to say here?
I don't know, because the young feminists that I've been talking about are the new generation, right? Like they're like 20 years old,
Yeah.
right? My students. So I just find it interesting how there are like definitely their views. Like we had a really interesting discussion in class the other day. I had assigned this article about gender differences in friendships between boys and girls, and how that was could be a risk factor or protective factor against youth crime. And so they were saying, well, it was, things have changed even since 2005 with regard to gender socialization and the way people, especially men, can express themselves more emotionally now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is true, but I don't know if it's as true as they think it is, because I guess some of the other research I've been doing looks at how, so I'm really interested in how people learn and apply anti-sexual violence workshops and training that are increasingly being offered at universities now, right? And a lot of it is around consent. That seems to be the most...
it's a hot topic.
Yeah, like the sort of most lauded way of teaching that right now. So I've been interviewing young people about that, like university-aged people.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them how they negotiate a sexual interaction, right? Like, how do you know if your partner is interested? How do you make sure that your partner knows you're interested or not? And what I found in that is very, like, surprisingly gender normative stuff.
Okay.
Like, amongst heterosexual people, it's like the young women are expecting the young men to make the first move. And said stuff like they hate the idea of making a move themselves because they
really
are so offended by rejection. So gender norms are more stubborn than I think we think they are.
Interesting.
So I do think it's changing, but I think that change will take a long time, and I think that's why we are where we are with sex work right now.
Yeah, for sure. We still have a long ways to go. Tell me a little bit about, if you can tell me about your students. Like, what kind of students do you find that are taking your class that are vested in this type of subject?
So I don't teach a class directly on sex work at York, but I do kind of integrate it into stuff where I can, because I think it's better to expose people that haven't necessarily chosen to learn about that topic to it, because then you're not preaching to the converted, which I find is something that we can often get into cycles of as academics or activists. Mm-hmm. So like right now I'm teaching youth crime, and we have a week on cultural anxieties around teenage sexuality. So I've assigned them a chapter in a book out of BC, actually, out of UBC Press. It's a sex work activism in Canada book. I forget the title of it now.
Oh, cool. Okay. That's okay.
Tuulia Law is one of the editors, and I think, yeah.
If it pops up later, we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah. So that chapter is two youth who are involved in trading sex for money, talking to each other. It's sort of a casual interview. Mm-hmm. So it's only their voices, right? And they talk about how assumptions of youth being exploited in the sex industry doesn't help them, and how they want sort of a more harm reduction approach to it, but also that they don't necessarily call it sex work because of the reasons why they're doing it, and also the forms in which they're doing it are not quite the same as as adult sex
Adults.
workers.
Okay.
That week we also talk about sexting and the
Yes.
moral panic around that, and how it's really, like, I find it really interesting, adults' responses to sexting, because it's basically abstinence, right? That's basically what they're telling young people. They're telling young women you should abstain because boys are risky, right? So it's like that's very much like a step backwards too in sex
Right.
education, right? We don't preach abstinence anymore in sex
No.
education. Now that there's like this new technological version of it, that's what it goes back to. So I think that illustrates the stubbornness of gender stereotype
For
again.
sure.
But yeah,
Interesting.
so anyway, I try to get them to read stuff as it pertains to my courses. And in another course, I've assigned some of my research with Professor Bruckert about management in the sex industry. It's a chapter of a report we did, and the chapter is called "Why Work for a Third Party." So it's featuring the narratives of sex workers from interviews talking about why they do that, which I think is something that people often wonder about, because all they know is the pimp stereotype.
Right. And you know what? That's a great segue. So why don't we start talking about sex industry management? Can you go a little bit about that?
Sure. So I guess the research that we did was about Eastern Canada, so it was Ontario all the way to the Maritimes, and we looked at the term that we used in the research was third parties. So anyone who organizes, supervises, manages, or facilitates the labor of sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that we did that was to get a broad catchment of people, right? We wanted people, and it was kind of interesting because we did get a couple of people. I remember reading a couple of interviews where people were saying things like, "Oh, I never thought of myself as a third party before, but I guess this is what I am doing," because some people did it sort of occasionally, right? So I helped. So after we got, it was a big project looking at various sectors ranging from strip clubs to other indoor venues like massage parlors and escort agencies, to the street. Mm-hmm. But we looked at the indoor, so we look at in-call, out-call stuff, and then I looked at the strip club stuff later myself. Mm-hmm. So amongst the indoor third parties, some people were, just doing it pretty casually. Like there was some people who were sort of a secretary to, like someone was working as sort of a secretary to one other sex worker. And that woman was also a former sex worker.
Okay.
So there was actually there was a lot of things that people don't expect. So like a lot of the people that we interviewed as third parties were women, so cis or trans women who were current or former sex workers. Mm-hmm. And so being a third party was either an extension of their own sex work or of their career in the sex industry, right? They wanted to, transition into another form of work in the sex industry,
right?
But still stay in it. But,
I see.
As we all know, it's harder to make a buck when you age.
Yes, a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so you've been doing this research for quite a long time now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like going into the research, were there any of your findings that really surprised you?
I've been sitting with it now for so long that it appears unsurprising. So I guess I'll start with like the most recent stuff I've looked at.
Okay.
Which is pretty niche. So so I got really into people's security strategies. Okay. Like how do third parties help sex workers protect themselves or not? So like in strip clubs, for example, bouncers are there, but the research also interviewed third parties and sex workers who worked for them. So the dancers said, the dancers didn't necessarily all agree that bouncers or management provided adequate security. Right. Sometimes they would, have a hard time getting bouncers to do stuff for them, like kick
people out.
who had crossed their boundaries out of the club or
Right.
get money for them. Other people found that they did do that. But the thing that I found really interesting about security was how people used like gender and racial stereotypes in their favor as a security strategy. So I just thought that was really interesting. So like, bouncers obviously like enact tough masculinity for that.
Right.
And but a few of the third parties that we interviewed managed men, and I found that really interesting because I guess we don't necessarily think of men in the sex industry as requiring
protection
right? So and so there was this one guy who had managed a massage parlor and also a strip club, and so one of the things he said was, well, like, these guys are muscly, right? So I don't really worry that too much about their security. And then this other guy who, interestingly, he was the only person in the whole research who unironically referred to himself as a pimp.
Really?
He was this gay guy who managed who booked duos with younger men so that to extend his income from sex work, which was diminishing because he was getting older. And so his security, when he talked about security, he talked about his own security because he was worried that the guys who worked for him would attack him.
Oh, wow.
And one time one of them kind of did, like, he picked up this, he kind of like quickly hired this guy and took him to a call, and he like robbed the client at knife point.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
It's an interesting, it's just a really interesting reversal of security assumptions and concerns, but also stuff that happens. I mean, not to say that like women never are able to protect themselves or don't retaliate against their clients. I think that's something that I guess we hear of in the news sometimes, if really dramatic. But I just found that really an interesting thing to look into.
What do you find, or what have you found in your research in regards to indoor sex work, or I guess maybe specifically to do with strip clubs? Like, what were the major issues or challenges that you found that strippers were having problems with in regards to their managers or management?
I mean, I would say a lot of the problems at strip clubs emanate from the fact that strippers are classified as independent contractors.
Right.
So there's not really, like, they can be fired easily by management. They can, they're expected to do free labor in some place, like in Ottawa, like,
oh my gosh,
because they have to work like a shift that the club tells them, but they're not paid hourly for it. They just make their money from lap dances.
Right.
And then there's a lot of discrimination based on how people look, right? So the strip clubs hire, or they prefer women who look like Pamela Anderson in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And then everyone else, if people are too dark or too fat for that, then they are not hired, or they're fired later on, or they're limited in how where they can work or how many shifts they can have. But I think this is a question that maybe I'll pass on to a couple of my colleagues from Work Safe Twerk Safe, because I see that they're here.
Yes, they popped in.
And I think it's always good to have people talk about management from their own perspective.
Yes, I would definitely love to hear more about that. Like, I just had an episode with Onyx Sachi, who's a dancer, who's based in Alberta right now, but she's also danced in like Western BC and also toured. And she has like an ongoing legal battle with one of the strip clubs there, and she's just been banned from working at any clubs in Alberta. And her story, I'm not sure if you've heard her story, but it's really just frustrating to hear that they can act in this kind of way. So, but I guess, that's just a sidebar. But I'd love to get in touch with, I see Jennifer. Hi. Hello. I'm Steph.
Hello.
It's nice to meet you. Welcome.
You too. Thanks for having us.
You are so very welcome. We're going to be talking about Work Safe Twerk Safe, which is an organization, and correct me if I'm wrong here. Correct me if I'm wrong, if it's an organization that was started in 2018, and it's all about, it's a stripper-led organization, and it's run by former and current exotic dancers. And I'd love to hear the need and the why for the group. Why was that formed?
I think, the first part of your interview shows the needs and the why.
Yes.
I think the stripper community is small and kind of niche in a way that we're often a little bit overlooked by broader advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an assumption that because, our job is legal, that we face less stigma than other sex workers, which to an extent is true.
Right.
But there's also kind of less specific resources for us.
Right. Or a lack thereof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or not accessible even. So yeah.
So we're trying to kind of fill that void.
For sure. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you were able to identify that, because I think I was looking through the website and there wasn't any other organization like that in Ontario. So you were able to step up and form it, and you've been going strong since 2018. So
yeah,
congrats.
I mean, the pandemic kind of threw a wrench into some things, but
right.
What didn't it throw a wrench in, right?
Yes, that is very correct. I also wanted to introduce, because I see another person on here as well, and correct me if this is wrong, Janice, are you there?
Yes.
Hello. Hi. Welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you.
And you're also part of Work Safe Twerk Safe, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Well, I'd love to hear more about it, and I've also just loved to get the word out on the great work that you are doing. So tell me a little bit about how this came to be, if we rewind back to 2018.
Jennifer, do you want to?
Yeah.
We're all being polite here and waiting for everyone to speak.
So in 2018, we started getting together with the nice ladies at METRAC, and they are a Toronto-based gender-based violence prevention nonprofit in Toronto.
Okay.
And they kind of secured us some funding for the first year with a focus on providing folks with legal education.
Mm-hmm.
So on our website, we've done some resources about, for example, if you have a problem at work and you want to report it somewhere, we've provided some links to public health, to municipal bylaw, to this and that, and kind of a short primer underneath to explain to people if the requests can be anonymous, how long does the process usually take,
right?
And just kind of what to expect to make that less daunting for people. Mm-hmm. We've also done some work about, what is consent and how is that a little bit different in the club than, in real life. And what do we have coming up? Later this month, so later in February, we're going to do a winter and COVID mental health workshop online. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love hearing about that. And I love the word daunting that you use, because when it comes to legal, I think, and I'm just using this as a generalization, but when it comes to legal, I feel that a lot of people are maybe turned off about that or not wanting to get involved. Maybe it sounds expensive. There's going to be money involved. How long is this going to take? There's just basically a lot of hurdles for one to cross when you get involved with legal. So was it difficult in terms of finding organizations that are willing or that are open to working with sex workers?
Well, we got really lucky with MedTrack.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think in the nonprofit world, kind of everyone knows each other.
Okay.
And I'd say that's kind of especially true in the kinds of places that do work for marginalized women.
Mm-hmm.
And also, in Toronto, like Maggie's Toronto
Yes.
is org for sex workers, and they've been around for like 35 years or something. So I think that, they definitely paved the way that kind of mainstream organizations in Toronto are more willing to work with sex workers.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they kind of see the need. They see that Maggie does a good job, and
That's awesome.
and I think that, it's really helpful. Like, I'm sure it's similar in the Vancouver area too.
I would say so, yeah.
But I think, like, if you were in small town, I don't know where, like,
Right.
that might be much harder, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think we're definitely blessed that we live in kind of a liberal city with, a vibrant gay village, et cetera, and yeah.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. I mean, as a sex worker, it can be difficult to, approach legal or just approach any type of help, and having that feeling of like, okay, am I going to be judged for what I do? And not just in terms of legal counsel, but also having a sex worker friendly, say, like, accountant and stuff too. I've heard.
No, we have that.
Oh, you do?
Have that.
Oh, wonderful. Please, I would love to hear more about, like, what else and what other services that Work Safe Twerk Safe offers.
So that's what I do, actually. I provide financial literacy for the
wonderful.
organization. So I have a background in accounting, as well as I'm a financial advisor.
Wow.
So we are coming up with a tax workshop sometime, I think in March, right?
Yes.
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 So sometimes in March. So I'm going to be doing that, presenting that, as well as giving some of the sex workers financial advice and solutions and strategies and stuff like that. Because, I mean, we do make big, sex workers make good money, right?
We do.
But a lot of the times, they don't know what to do with it. Like,
Yeah.
I remember days just thinking, I just have this money and it's just sitting here. I'm just going to go shopping, just for no reason, right? Not realizing about the long term effects, right? So
Yeah.
these are the things that I bring to the table.
I would love to hear more about that as well, just because, as you said, I mean, I'm guilty of it too, like, oh man, I scored big, like, last night at the club, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to treat myself.
Yeah, and we treat ourselves a lot. You know what I mean? Like, every day is Christmas for me. When I used to tell them, I'm like, every day is Christmas, So, yeah.
Yeah,
it's good to make lots of money, but it's also good to know what to do with it, right? Like, in the right way, where to put it,
right,
so that it does benefit you in the long run, because we have a very small window for our career, right?
Exactly. So, can you speak a little bit about, like, what kind of advice that you would give? I mean, I know we have, like, a short time frame here, but, like, what are some common questions that sex workers go to for in terms of accounting, and, like, how would you advise them, generally speaking?
So a lot of sex workers don't know, like, how they would report income, for instance, right? So I would provide them, okay, well, this is your industry code that you would use. They have an industry code for dancers. They have an industry code for sex workers. They also have an industry code. If you don't want to use that, you could use just whatever. You could say you're a consultant, right? So as long as you're reporting something, is what the government wants, even if you're selling drugs, believe it or not, the CRA, they want some of that money, so you'll get caught regardless, but the point is, right, you have to report your income. So It just makes sense to. And then it's a good idea to report your income because you get benefits.
Yes.
So a lot of the girls didn't understand that, you know, if you weren't filing your taxes, then you're not going to get CERB, you're not going to get CRB, you know. So it's important to do these things. If you have children, it's important to file your taxes, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's the advice I would give.
I feel we can do an episode on that entirely. It's such a big topic. And I would love to
do it. Yeah, it is. Money is, it is. It really is. Like, I've learned a lot from, you know, being a financial advisor and just from having money, being able to, you know, do these, buy stuff and whatever. So,
yeah.
I don't know. And
plan for the future as well. So.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about now, and I would like everybody else to think about that too.
For sure. I love to like kind of pivot the topic over to the current GoFundMe campaign because it's also very current. It's really relevant in regards to the pandemic that we're in. I'd love to hear more about that. So what I've read online about the ongoing campaign is that there's an ongoing legal case with the government of Ontario. So I guess this was created in response to the strip club closures that was Ontario-wide, and that was due to, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic. But obviously the government did this without consulting strippers. And, like, how was that going to affect their income, their livelihood, everything? So I don't know who would like to chime in. There's a lot of us on the call today.
Well, apparently, you know, our premier likes to say we're all in this together, but I think he put a little asterisk. Sex workers are not together.
Right.
So what happened is, oh my God, it's such a long story.
No, please.
Okay. Okay, so basically, you know, when Ontario started reopening a little bit here and there, clubs opened at reduced capacity, and no more lap dances. We all had to do like distance dancing, fine. And then there were 2 outbreaks in the Toronto clubs, and you know, I'm not trying to minimize that people got sick, but at one club it was 1 staff member and 1 client. At another club, it was, I think, 6 or 7 people that got ill.
Oh, wow.
And what turned out that was problematic in all of this is the clients lied on the contact tracing sheet.
Of course.
Of course.
Oh, my goodness.
And, you know, our point is, had we been consulted, had anyone bothered to make a Zoom call with a bunch of strippers, we would have been like, no, like, you know, we work in an industry where both the women that work there and the men that go there have kind of specific privacy considerations. And this contact tracing method is kind of inapplicable to our industry.
Right.
That didn't happen. The outbreak happened. The media hoopla happened.
Yes.
And they did this kind of knee-jerk response. So every other sector in Ontario was open or closed on like a regional public health geographical boundary basis.
Okay.
But when they closed the strip clubs, they closed all the strip clubs in all of Ontario. That means even in places that had, you know, very minimal cases compared to Toronto.
Oh, wow.
And the timing of this closure was the last weekend before the 1st of the month. The government didn't, you know, even let the clubs kind of, so the cutoff would have been at midnight on Friday.
Oh my gosh.
Midnight Friday, everybody goes home.
Wow.
And like, you know how it is. Weekends are, you know, generally there's more people in the clubs.
Yeah.
That's kind of giving you a better chance if you're scrambling for rent last minute.
Yeah.
this was also kind of in that window of time where CERB ended and the new benefit didn't begin.
Okay, so yeah, like I guess September, end of August or so, around
Yeah.
that timeline. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, end of September. And, we just felt that's unfair. We feel, especially in a pandemic, but in normal times too, it should be the workers at the table talking to government about their occupational health and safety needs.
Right.
It doesn't benefit dancers that the owners speak about our bodies and our health and our safety on our behalf.
Right.
Like, it turns into this weird situation where it's just a group of men at the table talking about the health and safety of the women whom they, purposely misclassify as employees.
Mm-hmm.
The wolf never cares about the health of the sheep.
No.
Story. And, we tried to kind of reasonably and nicely and politely ask, could you please, we'd like to sit at the table, and our offers were ignored. We weren't even dinged with a response. And so we felt like we had no other option than to file for this judicial review.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are. Our lawyer, our main lawyer, Naomi Sayers, is awesome.
Yay.
And a badass in so many ways. And she's helping us a lot.
That's wonderful.
But, we still have administrative costs that we have to pay for.
Right.
And so we're trying to raise $5,000 to, keep the momentum going.
Right.
And, we're quietly crossing our fingers.
Yeah, for
that
sure.
This, I think could be important in the long run for other sex workers too.
Absolutely.
Because we all deserve a seat at the table.
For sure. That's so great. I love hearing about this, but also it just breaks my heart to hear about all the efforts that you're going through and then not even hear a peep from the government at all.
Oh, no, they made peeps.
Oh, they
the
did?
Peeps just weren't very nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh no.
I feel bad for the husbands that have to go home tonight because of the brass rail, and how are they going to explain it to their wives?
Oh my gosh.
You don't feel bad for us,
Yeah.
sir?
Like, I thought our lovely mayor said, I don't know how these places are still open, what kind of reasonable person would be going there. Dear mayor,
Oh
we
my
pay
gosh.
$400 a year in licensing fees. Like, we exist. Like, why are we pretending all of a sudden that you found us under a tree?
Oh my gosh.
Like, it was not nice.
I am so sorry to hear that. Oh dear.
It's super not nice.
No. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I am glad. I'm happy that you've come onto the show, and I'm really hoping that we can get more dollars to the fund to help the organization, to help the
Thank you.
case.
That's
Yeah.
so nice.
I really hope that we'll be able to funnel some more dollars into that. So, but thank you for sharing. I know how incredibly frustrating it is, and almost all of the strip clubs here in BC are closed. There's one currently open that I'm supposed to be going back to work in a couple weeks, but I'm not sure why the other ones haven't reopened. But I think this one is kind of positioned.
Is it a question of island versus city?
No, this one is not right downtown where all the ones are currently shut down, but this one's in a municipality called Surrey. That one's still open, but I'm wondering if they're positioned as, say, maybe a sports bar that they're allowed to operate. But I'm not sure what's happening with that. But the other ones have not. They had reopened briefly, and then like Toronto, they had an outbreak at one of the local clubs here, and then of course the media just went to town on that, and it was just a nightmare, and they haven't reopened. So I'm not exactly sure what's happening with that on that front, at least. So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's just really frustrating, but
The whole thing is a mess. The whole world is a mess.
It's a weird time for sure, for the world. But there were a few questions that came in that I'd love to throw out to Dr. Law, Jennifer, Janice, all of you. So I explained to Dr. Law that some of these questions already off air, that some of them are actually quite similar. But I guess we can kind of just go into it. I believe the first three can kind of be grouped into one. So, can your vanilla job terminate or demote you due to you being involved in sex work? The other one is, can sex work jeopardize civilian lines of work? And then the other one, again, similar, could the employer ever terminate me or take away any hours if they find out about my online sex work? This person has an OnlyFans.
I'll start that one maybe, and other people can continue it if they want.
Sure.
So occupation is not a protected class in human rights or labor rights. So people can fire you for that, because it's not like, it's not racial discrimination or gender, like it's not one of the kinds of protected discrimination.
I see.
But and I guess sometimes we've heard about that in the newspaper, right? Like there was a couple of university lecturers in the States. There was at least one that's fired because they found out.
Paramedic.
Yes.
Yeah, and then there
was
was also like a high school teacher.
Yes.
Who was fired. So that does happen. I mean, that doesn't mean people don't make it work, right? Like I think that there's some jobs that people like. Jobs in healthcare and stuff. Like I did a study on what sex workers do after sex work, and some people go into jobs like that where they are less likely to encounter stigma, like peer outreach or social work or stuff like that.
Right.
Where maybe it's less stressful to keep that a secret because they either have told people and like. That's how people end up working somewhere like Maggie's, or it's just something that they might do as like a way to, maybe they keep a few clients if they're an escort along with their vanilla job and don't advertise anymore.
Right.
But yeah, employment is not a protected ground.
Covered. Okay, interesting. I actually didn't know that. Jennifer, Janice, did you want to chime in?
Dr. Law is 100% correct. But there is some interesting work. I think they're called APAG.
Okay.
It's the American Porn and Cam Girl Union. Like it's a guild for screen performers of the sexy nature.
Okay.
And they are in the process of doing some kind of legal work to potentially add occupation as a protected class in the States.
Cool. I didn't know that.
I don't know like how far along that is or, what the feasibility of that is. But, I'm crossing my fingers and toes for them.
Yes.
Yeah. Because, with these kind of broader justice issues, it's like if one jurisdiction gets her done, it kind of helps the forward push anywhere else, right?
Yes, definitely.
But definitely now we're not in that case, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense that porn performers are taking the lead on that too, because they're like especially vulnerable
on screen.
Yes.
It's like here's you and there's your face. Like what can you say for that? It's a little bit harder to prove if someone is an escort or a stripper.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you've seen them in person.
Interesting. I would love to do more research on that and hopefully hear some good things because that would be hugely progressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Janice, did you have anything to say about that? I don't want to leave you out.
No, I just, like, if I'm doing a vanilla job, I just generally tend to keep quiet about these types of things. Because, like she said, right, I do realize that there is a stigmatism against among sex workers.
Huge stigma.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So.
And I guess the last question here with regards to that response, which I didn't know of, but how do you fight unlawful termination over an employer firing you for being a sex worker? I guess you can't.
I don't know. Like, I guess I'll have a better answer about this at the end of the summer, because I'm going to get a student to research this over the summer so that we can have some more information about what people could actually do through existing legal mechanisms in Ontario.
Interesting.
We're hoping to put that on the website, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, I suppose you could, in theory, get a really clever lawyer that I'm sure is also super expensive.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe if you can swing it back to gender discrimination.
Yeah, maybe.
Interesting.
Then-
Yeah, that'd be a good approach.
So, yeah, I wonder.
Like, that's a big speculation and a big maybe, and depends on the competence of a lawyer.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
This is not legal advice.
Yeah, no, it seems like that would be expensive and a long
Maybe
shot.
it's not
Yeah.
worth it, right?
Right. That's another, might not be
Yeah,
worth
but I
it,
guess stay
so.
tuned. Stay tuned. Maybe we'll have an answer for that in August.
Yes, I'll have to email you back in August to see what the findings would be for that. But that's all the questions I have for this week's episode. But before I let all of you go, I just wanted to make sure that we covered everything. And were there any closing notes or statements or anything that you want to say to the audience in regards to, sex industry management, Work Safe Twerk Safe, anything along those lines?
We're always an email away. And, if strippers have a question or want to say hello or want to write us a brief intro and be like, hello, I'm so-and-so from club here and here. Can I, come to your next event? We're always an email away.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and we have Zoom events lately, so
Oh,
people
cool.
can from different province if they want.
That would be awesome. I know you mentioned there's an event coming up in March. This episode should be released, I think, at the end of February. But if you have any upcoming events, I'd love to plug it.
So unfortunately, we have just set a date for the mental health workshop.
Mm-hmm.
That will be on February 22nd
Okay.
at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in March, we're going to have a tax preparation / financial literacy one.
Awesome.
Janice, did you settle on a date for that yet, or?
No, I thought you were going to get back to me. We
Okay.
could do it like the first or second week of March.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. That'll be just in time. So yay. I'll be sure to plug that. Like once I get the notes, I'll get in contact with both of you and I can plug down the show notes.
Awesome.
Yeah, to help promote
Perfect.
it. So, but yeah.
And we advertise that stuff on the website too.
Right.
I just because I don't think because we end up talking about various stuff earlier in the interview. I'll just close with a few comments about management.
Sure.
So I was referring to that thing that I assign students to read sometimes. Why work with third parties? So maybe I'll just close with like a few reasons for that.
Sure.
So sex workers work with third parties because it's kind of like the decision that people make in other professions or other trades like plumbing. Either you could work for someone else and just go to work and come home, or you could open your own business and have to do all the responsibilities that people who run a business have, right? Like pay the rent and like buy all the tools and like set up everything, like get the contracts. Whereas, that's a big reason why sex workers work for third parties is because if you work for an escort agency, then someone takes care of your screening and books your appointments, and all you have to do is show up. With a strip club, you go into a club and there's a whole infrastructure there for you. And then you just can get your money and from the customers and leave. And there's, and it's more casual than more mainstream job environments where it's easier to take time off. Yeah, it's just people. So I think that's a big reason why people work for third parties in the sex industry is because they can it just makes it easier to make money without having all those other business related responsibilities.
For sure. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
even at a strip club, even though the bouncers and management don't always do a good job in terms of like kicking customers out if they cross people's boundaries, you know, even though strippers do have complaints about that, they're still there, right? They're still there. So
Other strippers are there, most importantly.
Yes.
yeah. So
Right.
like all of that, like infrastructure makes it feel safer and more comfortable.
Definitely. The security, like the camaraderie as well.
Yeah.
Like those are just things that you can't, or would be hard to do if you're independent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can't change your own gossip with yourself.
No.
I mean, you can, but that's kind of insanity.
Learn anything new, right? It would just be
Yeah.
fun.
Definitely.
Right.
Oh, I definitely miss that so much. So much. Well, awesome. I mean, before I let all of you go, where can we find you? Or, yeah, can we find you? We have a
Yes,
website.
can.
Yes.
Yeah, on Twitter.
Yes. And I think,
We are on Twitter and we have a website.
perfect. What is the handle on Twitter again?
Twerk Safe.
Twerk Safe. Perfect. I'll be sure to add that in the show notes as well. So, yeah, I guess with that wraps up the episode. So, Dr. Law, Jennifer, Janice, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Today was a complete pleasure, and thanks for dealing with the time difference as well. Mini time difference. But it's Strip by Sia on Instagram. It's also my personal is Sia Steph, and it's new episodes every single Sunday. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe on Apple, as well as give me a 5-star review if you like the content. So anyways, another episode next Sunday. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.
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 You're listening to Strip by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia, artwork by Maria Bellandarama, music by Ted D, and photography by Ian Dabburn.